Hey, Nikki, we need to unmute, and can you restart?
Good morning. Am I unmuted? All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tapestry. My name is Nikky Contractor, and I am humbled and honored to serve as your worship associate for our time in connection today. At Tapestry, we are committed to honoring diversity, allowing people to sincerely and deeply explore our innermost questions so that together we can gain clarity of our beliefs and conviction. Some of you may have been members for decades, and some of you may be joining us for the first time today. During this time of social distancing, we come together virtually to maintain the ties that we have built in this multi-generational community. And finally, I say welcome wherever you are, whether you are in your living room, dining room, or bedroom, whether you are in your Sunday best or your pajamas. We encourage you to turn on your cameras if your bandwidth permits, and after you've checked to ensure that there are no surprises that may make their way onto the camera, so that we may enjoy seeing your smiling faces. Technology is a wonderful tool that has enabled us to be together in worship, despite the current needs for social distancing. I encourage you to check in to your favorite social media platform to let them know you are with us today, and maybe even share the Zoom link so they can join our service if they so desire. At this time, I also encourage you to find a chalice or a candle at home so that you can light it with us during the chalice lighting ceremony. Thank you for your patience as we are all learning this new technology together in community. Please remember to keep your microphone muted throughout the service. Again, we would love to see your smiling faces. The chat function is available for greeting each other, and we encourage you to do so during the times that have been designated for this. Greeting one another on a Sunday morning, welcoming Tapestry members and friends, and extending a hand or a warm hug is personally one of my favorite parts of our usual services. It may come as no surprise then that this moment in our shared Zoom service is also one of my favorites. So I encourage you now to open your chat box, let us know that you are here, and if you are new to Tapestry, please take a moment to introduce yourself via the chat function. As a reminder, you can continue your conversations after the service. The Zoom meeting will remain open for you to connect by chat. At Tapestry, we're an active congregation, and you can participate in a number of virtual activities that we have organized. Newcomers are invited to a chat with Reverend Kent today at 11:45. On Wednesdays, there is a community meditation at 7 p.m., and on Fridays, we invite you to grab your lunch and gather together via Zoom. Please refer to your order of service for additional details on these activities and more. Zoom meeting details are also provided in the order of service, as well as our newsletters and website. The theme for the month of May is Sabbath. Growing up in New Jersey, raised in the shadows of New York City, followed by a good chunk of time as a resident of Philadelphia's mainline community, I often heard the following words and even repeated them, perhaps a little mindlessly: Shabbat Shalom. Without truly understanding the meaning of these words, I knew that the Jewish people in my acquaintance celebrated the Sabbath, a day of rest from Friday evening to Saturday evening. Just as my Christian friends celebrated something similar on Sundays, and that Friday afternoon prayer was the time to gather for worship for Muslims. What my younger self, the child and teenager, understood about all of these was that this was the time set aside for family, and that family, in that sense, could consist of all the extended members of a faith community. I also knew during this time that I couldn't call on my friends to play. I couldn't have them come dig holes in the backyard or create endless stories and epic battles between the G.I. Joe collectors and the Cabbage Patch doll collectors, or just play wiffle ball in the front yard. What I understood was that this was a time that was set aside for something else. In researching the theological concept of the Sabbath, I've come to realize that there is great debate amongst religious scholars, both of the same monotheistic religion as well as between the religions. As any good Unitarian Universalist, I looked at all of these arguments and started to wonder, well, what and which of these arguments do I buy, and how might I apply these concepts to my own life? The word Sabbath derives from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means rest. But where does this concept of rest come from? Scholars suggest that the earliest reference is in Deuteronomy 5:14. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female slave, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your livestock, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. For example, let's start with to whom the Sabbath is applied. Slaves, livestock, foreigners, a universal application of the rest which focuses not on the elite, but the underclass, and suggests that all beings have a right to rest. This is a uniquely universal application of a religious concept that I can get behind. Well, maybe not the slave part. Oh, and by the way, what an acknowledgement of the interconnected web of life within which we all reside when we acknowledge that all beings have a right to rest. The Sabbath as a time for all to rest certainly makes sense to me and jibes with the observations of my youth that this is a time to put aside our normal day-to-day pursuits, whether they be carrying the burdens of others or as simple as no wiffle ball in the front yard. But is the Sabbath just about resting from our daily pursuits? Or is there deeper meaning? Is there a spiritual pursuit, a connection to being or purpose or our place in the universe? Why do we need this time? I'd like to share with you a phrase which I haven't been able to attribute, but has particular resonance for me. This is a moment in time to take a break from the doing, to recognize what we have done and to contemplate and perhaps even to hope and dream about where we might go. This strikes me as hitting very squarely on the concept of awareness, because we can be so caught up in the doing that we can forget to make place for the being. And before the stay-at-home orders, I can tell you that my family was like so many others, running the hamster wheel of life, moving from school or work to activities, often scrambling to keep up with the massive load of schoolwork, work, and homework. Sacrificing time with our families in order to just get things done. While we often attempted to make time at the dinner table or on Sunday mornings at Tapestry with all of you, to contemplate and to express thanks and gratitude for our experiences, for our friends and our family, for all that we have, I can also tell you that we applied this inconsistently and we struggled to find the time for this important spiritual work. We have been subsumed by the doing. The Rabbi Abraham Heschel wrote in his book, Sabbath, "It is not a thing that lends significance to the moment. It is the moment that gives significance to things." It is suggested that Heschel's work was written to give people a sense of meaning by encountering these holy moments, even in the face of an existential threat. If you consider the time and experiences of Rabbi Heschel, it seems obvious that this is in relation to the Holocaust and the use of the nuclear bomb that ended World War II. A time when the world was at its bleakest, and it seemed that we might never emerge whole. Again, we are faced with a global crisis, where things seem bleak, and it is hard to imagine the future. As we continue to stay home, work from home, social distance, and generally limit our contact with other humans, it is not hard to begin to wonder, what does the future hold? How will it be different from today? What are the good things that we will hold on to? The bad things that we will let go of? How will we use this time and experience to build a better world we all desire? In our small nuclear family, these conversations now occur daily. As we stretch our legs on walks around the neighborhood, safely maintaining a social distance from our neighbors, as you can say, we have been forced to take this break. It occurs to me that as a people, as a planet, we have been racing forward, more concerned with the doing than with the being. Have we been forced in a way to take a global collective Sabbath? What will we learn from this time? Reverend Kent will be speaking about the topic of Chronos and Kairos, both concepts of time, which when I first heard about it sounded utterly cerebral. And I wondered, how on earth does this relate to the concept of Sabbath? However, I've come to realize that the concept of time is intimately related to the Sabbath. And while much of our time is often dedicated to the doing, we should consciously, deliberately take moments in time for the rest, for the contemplation, and for the awareness. I go back to those moments in my youth when observing the detritus from the epic backyard battle between G.I. Joe dolls and Cabbage Patch dolls and planning for the next. And I realized that there was a time set aside for something else. And I realized that this too is a time for something else, a time to reflect. And from this, I hope we can emerge having taken stock of all that we have done, but more importantly, having contemplated all that we could be. And now we invite you to light a candle at home in representation of the flaming chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Our flame is a symbol of transcendence, truth triumphing over the forces of superstition and fear. Our circle proclaims that the earth and all its inhabitants are one, and from the common container of this chalice, we share the warm welcome of our beloved congregation. I now invite you to join me in reading our covenant and to sing our song of affirmation. Because Zoom can only recognize one voice at a time, please keep your microphones muted, but read along with me in your homes. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another.
The call to worship that I have for you this morning comes from my esteemed colleague, the Reverend John Gibb Millspaw. He writes, "Leave aside the little thoughts that distract you from the depths of your soul. For this is a holy place, and now is a holy time. Join with others here, this community of seekers, and together, let us find our Sabbath." Welcome to Tapestry. Welcome to our time to be together. It's great to see you all this morning. And our opening hymn is number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a love in mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when We are blessed with love and amazing grace when our heart is in a holy place. When we share the silence of sacred space and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place. We are blessed with love and amazing grace when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
For our Time for All Ages this morning, I have a story. It's called God is Like Darkness. I don't have any pictures for this story, but it's actually kind of perfect because our worship service today, we're going to be talking about rest and quiet and the importance of maybe even some darkness in our lives. So if you're comfortable, kids and adults, if you want to close your eyes for this story just to experience a little bit of darkness, it may be a good idea. In the beginning, at the same time the power of God took the form of light, it also took the form of darkness. Though it may sound strange, whenever it was light, it was darkness too. The two always went together. At first, however, God's power was so dazzled by its lights that it didn't even notice the darkness. After the power of God had all the fun of seeing what its light could do, it noticed that whenever it was flickering or flashing or beaming or blazing, there was a darkness in the background, like an empty paper for it to make pictures on. It had been so busy making patterns and designs and turning itself into colors, it hadn't even noticed that no one could see its creations without the darkness that was always behind and under and around all the brightness and the light. When it realized this, the light switched itself off for the moment and decided to find out more about being darkness. And so it did. Many, many years later, there was a child, and that child's parents had just said, "It's time to go to bed." And the child said, "I can't yet because I have to get a drink of water." The child's parents said, "Okay, one quick drink of water and then off to bed." So the child went to bed and the parents gave one more hug and then turned off the light. Lying in bed, the child said, "Why does it have to be dark? Why couldn't it always be light? I don't like this darkness. Why is there darkness anyway?" And the power of God that was darkness heard the child's question and answered. "Once upon a time, I wondered about the very same question, and now I think I understand. If you'd like me to, I could tell you about some of my ideas. Tell me first, though, what is it you don't like about my darkness?" The child said, "Well, I can't see anything." And the darkness replied, "Yes, in one way that's true, but in another way it isn't. You can't see things like your toys or your bed, but you can close your eyes and see with your inner eye, because those other things aren't getting in the way. You have a chance to see things in your own mind, in your own spirit, the kinds of things that we see in our dreams. You must use your inner eye if your spirit is to grow." And the child said, "But sometimes the things I see that way are scary." Yes, sometimes they are, but we need to know about the things that scare us so that we can understand them better and so that we aren't afraid of them in the daylight. My darkness gives you a chance to grow stronger and braver in your dreams. And of course, some dreams are fun and wonderful. The child said, "I know," remembering all of the good dreams. But there's another thing that I don't like about your darkness. I can't find my way. Even if I have to get up, I might bump into something and hurt myself. Well, if you have to get up and move around, then maybe you do need some light, said the darkness. But my darkness comes in the nighttime, and that's the time for resting, not moving. You use up a lot of your power and energy in the daylight, so you need a quiet time of the night to create more energy. That's when you grow. You know how bulbs and seeds need to snuggle in the darkness of the earth before they can grow? And you know how baby animals are in the darkness of eggs and their mother's wombs before they can grow? All creatures, plants, animals, and people need both times of moving around and doing things and times for rest and growing. The child said, well, maybe darkness is good for those night things. But when I'm in the dark, sometimes I feel alone. Yes, sometimes we feel alone, but the people you love are really quite near you, just in the next room, God said. And I'm always with you. Darkness is just one of my many forms. Well, I guess there's something good about darkness, yawned the child, turning over and curling up like a baby in the dark of its mother's womb. At least you don't seem to so scary when I'm talking to you like this. Then the child's eyes closed, and the darkness that was one of the forms of God wrapped itself carefully and very gently around the child. And within the mystery of that darkness, something new and wonderful began. Here ends our story. Our reading this morning is a beloved poem by Wendell Berry that is in our hymnals. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
Spirit of life, mysterious power in all creation,
we come drawn by one another and by the hope that we might discover the hidden meanings, that we might once again trust a mystery its promise of a false simplicity. We celebrate community in all its creative potential and its limits to our freedom.
And when the advancing edge of time, always so near, cuts us apart, and walls and worries separate us one more time, let our creation sustain us and let us know that we shall meet again. Amen.
What a beautiful collaboration with Francisco. I wanted to share with you all, Francisco is the musician at Long Beach, so this same piece of music will get used at their congregation, either today or sometime very soon. Would you join me now in a short time of prayer or meditation? Our prayer this morning comes from Stephen M. Schick. Spirit of life, grant me the courage to love boldly in the face of my greatest fears. Grow me in your wisdom, and let my actions speak when silence threatens justice and indifference disturbs peace. When gossip, hate, and cruelty arise among friends or in public places, help me bravely walk forward with love. When I defensively assert certainty in the presence of the unknown, grant me the courage to live comfortably in the unanswerable questions of life. Bless me with the eternal gift of not knowing, and let it take root in me until it pushes forth shoots of understanding and branches of humility. We join now in a time of silence to sit together. May we find in that stillness an opportunity to sit with the unknown. Let us find curiosity in this time of openness. Namaste. Amen and blessed be. As Nikki mentioned a little bit about, the ancient Greeks had two words for time, Chronos and Kairos. They understood that time was not all the same. Chronos refers to chronological or sequential time. Chronos is ordinary time, the way in which we exist most of our days. The flow of time in predictable sequence. The Greeks also spoke of Kairos. Kairos refers to a particular time of action. Kairos is the right or the critical or the opportune moment. Kairos is the supreme moment. It's qualitatively different. Though we don't have different words for these modes in the English language, we feel them. There's a big difference between this meeting will last 45 minutes and now it's time. Chronos versus Kairos is the ordinary versus the extraordinary, the mundane versus the sacred, the desert versus the oasis. Abraham Joshua Heschel, the most highly regarded modern Jewish writer on the topic of Sabbath, talked about Sabbath as Kairos time. It's time set apart from the ordinary, an appointed time when something very, very special happens. This month in worship at Tapestry, we're focusing on Sabbath. Keeping the Sabbath was the fourth commandment delivered to Moses and the Jewish people. In the United States, we typically take Sunday off as a day off from work. For most of you, participating in Tapestry has a sense of a weekly rhythm and acknowledging sacred time. This month, though, as we talk about Sabbath, we're not only talking about a day of the week, we're talking about the importance of marking some particular time as special and set apart. That may be in worship. It may be the 5 minutes in the morning before the world is awake, before you're completely awake, when you set a good intention for the day. Or perhaps Sabbath comes at the end of the day when you sit down and enjoy dinner with your family. The how and the when matters less than the actual setting aside of the time. The past several weeks, it's been fun leading our Wednesday night meditation group with several Tapestry members. We're exploring different styles. We've done breathing meditation and guided meditation, and we've read poetry together. The one thing that I don't think I've talked about with them, which is probably the most important piece of my meditation practice, is the setting aside time. I set the timer on my phone for 20 minutes. Sometimes I do focus on breathing or mindfulness. Sometimes I pray. Sometimes I practice compassion for myself or for others. But the one consistent piece of my practice is setting a timer. Setting a timer sets time apart. In that time, there's nothing that I have to do but sit. There's no measure of productivity or success in meditation. All I have to do is sit and be for 20 minutes. Just sit and be myself. And that's enough. It's a mini Sabbath. As this month approached with the theme of Sabbath, part of me was concerned about how applicable it would be right now. In the midst of stay-at-home orders and social distancing, did we really need to take a deep dive into the discipline of taking time for leisure? As I came to better understand the purpose of Sabbath this week, though, I came to know that the answer is yes. Perhaps now more than ever, we can use a reminder about Sabbath. Because it isn't just time away from work. Sabbath is a time of reconnecting with the ground of our being. It's a time to step away from the busyness of our lives, to pause and gain a broader perspective. While we're at home social distancing to protect one another, it can feel like we have all the time in the world to rest. But most of us fill most of that time with doing and distraction. We play games and watch silly shows. We may paint a room or clean out a closet. And staying occupied is a really good way to maintain a sense of purpose in these days. But distraction is not the same as rest. Distraction, like food or like alcohol, can draw our attention away from what is really happening inside. It's not the same thing as resting. Even when sheltered in place orders are in effect, even when it seems we have nothing but time, still, we're called to set aside some of it, to step into a moment of Kairos, a moment of opening ourselves to the sacred. Abraham Joshua Heschel was born in Warsaw, Poland. I mentioned him before. He's one of the most prominent Jewish theologians of the 20th century, and his book, The Sabbath, published in 1951, is a classic of Jewish spirituality. In the book, he drew a distinction in time of Sabbath between sacred and mundane. He also drew a line between being and doing. So much of our lives we spend doing. We're working and going and even parenting and caring for others. We're doing. It's very easy to continue that doing mentality, even while we're away from our jobs. Of course, not all of us are away from work. For some of us, COVID-19 has brought the opposite experience of time to our lives. The magic of the internet enables us to work from home. There are some great benefits of working in pajamas and not having to drive anywhere. You can snack as much as you want with the refrigerator just a few steps away. There are challenges too, though. Family members compete for our time and attention during the workday. And virtual interactions just aren't as effective as face-to-face conversations. The one challenge I don't hear people talking as much about, though, is the fact that the work is never done. At any time, day or night, you can dive into a project. You can answer more emails, and the access to work is unlimited. The supply is never ending. Just because you finished one project doesn't mean you can't get started on the next. It's all right there. And I thought this anxiety of unfinished work was part of technology or part of working from home. Well, it turns out around 1700 years ago, in the year 300, Jewish religious teaching records rabbis having this exact same conversation. They questioned, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work? Abraham Joshua Heschel clarifies for us what they may have meant. Is it possible for a human being to do all their work in 6 days? Does not our work always remain incomplete? Rest on the Sabbath, as if all your work were done. Rest even from the thought of work. That anxiety of unfinished work may be exacerbated by technology, but it is nothing new. For as long as there has been work, there has been more of it to do than we can do in one sitting. Even though more work awaits us, actually because more work awaits us, we need a time to step back from toil, to remember the bigger picture. I know that keeping Sabbath can sound like a sort of humdrum commitment to rest. Oh, I want to suggest that it puts into action actually some pretty radical ideas. Some say it this way: we're human beings, not human doings. We're human beings, not human doings. Our highest purpose is not to work and produce. Our highest purpose is to be together in community, to be in connection with the sacred, to be in solitude, cultivating our inner wisdom. We're human beings, not human doings. A person's worth does not depend on their ability to produce. In our capitalistic consumer culture, that is a blasphemous statement. A person's worth is inherent. It's not something that we can earn through doing enough or saying enough or knowing enough or creating enough. It's just there. A person's worth does not depend on their ability to produce. If you know anything about Unitarian Universalism, you've looked into the 7 principles. And if you remember any of those 7, you remember the first. We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Sabbath is an embodiment of that piece of our faith. It's a reminder that it doesn't matter how much we achieved this week. It doesn't matter if we completed a marathon, restructured an entire team that we manage at work. It doesn't matter if we barely got the kids bathed and fed yesterday, or if we were gold star parents. It doesn't matter if we retired 5 years ago, or if we were furloughed from our jobs. And you know what? It doesn't even matter if we screwed up really bad and got fired, because our worth and dignity are inherent to our being. Again, Abraham Joshua Heschel explains the Sabbath as a day of rest, as a day of abstaining from toil, is not for the purpose of recovering one's lost strength and becoming fit for the forthcoming labor. The Sabbath is a day for the sake of life. The Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays. The weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It's not an interlude, but the climax of living. It takes practice and pause to appreciate that we are enough. The Jewish creation myth of Genesis, the story that the Sabbath may be based on, says that once God had created the world, including humans, God saw that it was good. And so there was a 7th day of rest and enjoyment. You don't have to believe in God. You certainly don't have to believe in that 7-day creation myth. But I urge you to find it in your mind and in your heart enough space to appreciate that creation is good. You and your life included. It's not good because you earned it this week. It's simply good. Of course, Sabbath isn't a solitary event. When we remind ourselves of the goodness of life for a day or even a few hours, we paint a picture of what justice looks like, what a compassionate social order looks like. I've said many times that one of the ways that building religious community is the tool for changing the world is that it gives us the opportunity to practice building more compassionate ways of relationship. We get to offer help from our abundance. and receive help to get through our challenges. We get to sit with people whose stories are really different from our own and join them in singing and praying for our shared concerns. We get to engage in struggles for justice for women, for immigrants, for our neighbors without homes. Perhaps most of all, we get to bump into each other, figuratively and literally, to practice patience and forgiveness. It's a pretty amazing opportunity. This week, as we talk about the deeper meaning of Sabbath, I'm reminded that the opportunity is more than practicing our polite behavior. Our Sabbath, our time in community, is a time to see the world through a different lens. It's a time to recognize and value the inherent worth and dignity of our neighbors and ourselves, regardless of the doing. Abraham Joshua Heschel was a lot more than a writer and a teacher. He was also a fierce advocate for justice. In the civil rights movement, he marched side by side with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and later said that as he marched in Selma, he was praying with his feet. You may have heard that line before. In 1968, King was looking forward to attending Passover Seder at Heschel's home, but was assassinated a few weeks before the Jewish holiday. Setting time apart for Sabbath lifts up a holy vision of how the world could be and performs a deeply political work. Heschel writes, "The self that emerges from a Sabbath and re-enters the week is a changed self, a newly radicalized self who can no longer tolerate injustice. So may it be for us. As we emerge from our Sabbath of this hour and gatherings every Sunday, as we emerge from the small moments of sacred rest, may we be changed. May we too re-enter the week. May we return from Kairos back to Chronos, from the sacred to the ordinary, with a commitment to bring some of that vision of the holy with us, to share it with our neighbors who are hungry for hope." Amen. It's the custom of our congregation to share a portion of our offerings with an organization that shares our values. This month, we're splitting half of our gifts with Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and their efforts to protect the earth. I invite you to take a quick journey online to go to our Tapestry online giving page to support both Tapestry and our neighbors at Standing Rock Sioux Tribe with your generosity.
But though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth, no storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging, since love prevails in heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing when tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near? How can I keep from singing to prison cell and dungeon vile? Our thoughts to them are ringing, when friends by shame are undefiled. How can I keep from singing?
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Hold in your heart the certainty that the spirit of life is with you always. When your heart is torn asunder, or when you soar with sweet joy, you're never alone, never apart from the spirit that resides within us all. Go in peace, and let the light within you be a blessing to the world.